Good evening. It is 7 o'clock, and I will now call the special meeting of the New Milford Board of Education to order. If we could please begin with our Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and thank you all for coming this evening. We're moving on to item 2 of our agenda, which is discussion and possible action. We're resuming the special meeting that we had last time. So at this point, it's time for the board to have any discussions or ask any questions that they would like to ask.
We left off with John. Can we give him?
Yes, we did leave off with Mr. Spatola, and thank you for reminding me. I promised that you would be able to start the meeting.
Thank you. To start off, and I think that I asked this question last time, it would be to Dr. Pattyfoot. And it's a pretty simple question, is would we continue the recess period for 6th graders? I know a lot of school districts don't. We do today. Will that be continued if there is a redistricting?
At this point, it wasn't part of the plan.
Okay.
We would be continuing the same amount of recess gym periods that they have here as well as at Scatterhook.
Okay. I have some concerns, and I think the public had some concerns about bullying and disruptions to the 6th graders if they move to Scatterhook School. With regards to these two issues, do you have any plans or specific training to give to your staff or handouts about bullying? And how do you engage the students and staff, possibly through educational assemblies or forum, to make sure that we address this issue on bullying?
Well, I would hope that we're addressing it here, and we would continue to address it at Scatterhook if the 6th grade moved up there.
I had heard one thing that I believe it was Mrs. Ford who had stated that, and I thought it was some type of a bullying, that the older kids were knocking school books out of children's hands. I didn't address it that evening, but I think it's some form of bullying when you do that.
She relayed that was something that was happening in another school and involved her grandchildren when she interviewed her grandchildren who were in a school that is 6 through 8. That was my recollection of that.
Okay. The other question I asked, and I believe you addressed it again, when Scatterhook was proposed in 1973, then Northville Elementary in 82, we, the voters of New Milford, approved the schools, the campuses. But we were told at that time that there was enough expansion capability that existed at Scatterhook, Northville School, and Hill and Plain School, that if we needed to expand, there was expansion on all 3 campuses.
Yeah, I could not find anything with respect to that particular information. Mr. Calhoun, have you, I think we had talked about this, did you find anything in the records that you have at your office?
No, I could not find anything on the record that spoke of that.
Okay, yeah, that's from my memory, but I do remember because I did vote. I would ask the administration, if the plan is to close John Pettibone School, to draft a strategic plan to identify early warning and discipline problems that the 6th grade students may have to acclimate the move to Scatterhook Middle School. During the first year after the move, quarterly surveys should be administered to identify and address any physical and emotional difficulties, discipline issues, behavioral adjustments, and students' academic performance. All members of the 6th grade community, including teachers, staff, parents, and students, should be engaged participants in the survey to identify the effectiveness and efficiency of the strategies in place. The quarterly surveys should be presented to this board, the Board of Education, in a timely manner so that we can review and analyze the data and the problems. Based on the data collected, the problem areas can be prioritized and resources can be accessed to ensure the problems are corrected. Additionally, if we close JPS, I would like the administration to provide the estimated number. We've done that already at the last meeting. So that's, I guess, the end of what I have to say. I'm just afraid if there's problems, the board here would like to be aware of them and to be able to address them immediately when they arise. Thank you.
Mr. Littlefield?
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to put forth a motion to close John Pettibone School at the conclusion of the 14-15 school year, effective June 30th, 2015, and to redistrict based on Scenario B of the school facility and utilization plan, and furthermore to assign an appropriate subcommittee to review and recommend the disposition of the John Pettibone property at a future date to be determined.
Second.
Would you like to have a discussion?
Yes. What's that?
She wants to take it.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak on your motion?
Yes.
Wendy seconded.
I did.
This decision to move forward on this has been very difficult. We've looked at a lot of data, and to say that we're unsure or that I'm unsure is an understatement.
Excuse me.
Because there's nothing for certain in the world. But based on what we see so far,
Excuse me. There is no room for comment.
based on what we know for sure, or based on what we believe, is that there is definitely a downward trend. And within our town, I don't foresee the population increasing anytime soon or additional businesses of any significance coming to town anytime soon, which would facilitate additional families in town. Until our economy turns around, I don't foresee any of this happening, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. It's like I said, it's a difficult decision, but a decision needs to be made.
Yes. Mr. Lawson? Absolutely.
I would like to yield my time to Mr. Coppola.
Well,
Okay.
thank you.
And then we'll go back to you.
Yes, please.
I disagree with the we. That doesn't mean all of us here. I just want to make that very clear. And I'd like to welcome people back. I'm sorry that the way things are operating that you don't have a chance to speak this evening. So thank you very much. Thank you, distinguished council people. I'm glad that you come out to our meetings and have to be silent. That is an advantage of not having public participation. I disagree with you because when I was on town council, we were told that we would have to buy the adjacent land because it was at capacity by someone who did research for us. No one expected the economy to flip like it did. I say to you that it might go the other way, and particularly if I'm looking at Mr. Cummings and the rest of the papers about the area that is growing the fastest in the state of Connecticut is the Danbury area. And I see the next wave of immigrants looking at us as a future place. And so I think it would be a mistake. If we close Pettibone and do what it was indicated at some of our hearings that we sell the land, we would gain $23 million. I'd like you to know that Newtown, which the state is paying for Sandy Hook, is $15 million on the table at the moment, and they have the land. I see us being in trouble, either expanding Hill and Plain or Northville. That $23 million savings is gone. I really believe that, like my wife's family, who was Polish, who moved to a town called, or you can call it the city of Hamtramck, where the Dodge plant was, surrounded by Detroit. And they did like my Italian family did when they were came into Boston. We moved out to the suburbs. Attleboro, Mass. was one of ours. That was not expected to see all these great Italians coming into an Irish community. Same as my wife's Polish family, relatives moved into the suburbs around Detroit. I see that happening in the next wave because we are the spot. We have the rentals. I believe there is going to be 38 new rentals, and I'm upset about it because it's tearing down the Barton Homestead, which I believe is part of our history. I hate to see it be plowed under. 38. Zoning had approved it. I realize zoning might have been forced to approve it because there is Affordable Housing Act that can supersede. I'm not sure where it is, but there is another spot in town where 15 more houses are being, or apartments. We have the apartments. Some of our condominium complexes are not for owner-occupied. They were bought as speculation for people to rent. So I totally disagree with you. I think you're going to see more than the $23 million. But I do hope that town council, if you sell it, that you have a resolution that money will be held for the children. And the children, I don't believe, care one way or the other of Scattercoke's roof. So that money would be directly to them. I believe Mr. Bass, Katie Francis brought that up in their presentation. So I hope you make that resolution if this comes to pass before we sell it. And so it's on record, because I've been on town council and I know how that can escape, because you may not be there when it actually happens. One of the questions I have for the superintendent, or I don't mean you directly, but you can pass it to someone else. When you, if this plan goes, I know that it's going to have Hill and Plain School and Northville. My question, as I looked at the diagram that you gave us, doesn't look like much room that's going to be in the first time that they're going to be up there. I'm concerned about our specials, and then particularly art and music. They were on cots when I was at Northville, and they were on cots when I was in Hill and Plain. We're going to have adequate space to accommodate the new Hill and Plain, the new Northville, and not reduce the time that they now have in those areas.
Well, I think the time is one issue that we're looking at.
All right, then I'll cut it in two.
For other reasons, okay? But what we have to remember with the reconfiguration is you're taking out the third grades.
But you're adding more than that in the other two schools, so those two schools are going to be larger.
But we never encroached on the art, the music, and the PE. Right?
All right, so you're saying that's not going to happen, and the time will stay the same as it is being offered in the
No,
present.
I'm not committing to the time being the same, because we're looking at instructional time across the board for more time for math and literacy.
So that's a possibility that they will be reduced.
I mean, that's a separate issue. That doesn't matter if you keep 3 elementary schools or you have 2 elementary schools. We're looking at that because of some of the things that the feedback that we've been talking about test scores, that we need to spend more time on math and literacy. And if the day is not extended for staff and students, then we're going to have to look at using the time
that has
more
not come
efficiently.
through any of the subcommittees at the moment. I missed a few because I got on in December, as Josh
Well,
knows.
that's why I'm bifurcating it and saying that I'm not going to say that won't change.
I'm trying to push you into that. You know that.
I know, I can tell. And I'm not letting you twist my arm up my back
I
over that issue.
I appreciate that you are standing firm on that and giving me the information, and I'll bug the assistant superintendent when that comes up at a future date then. The other thing is that when I talked to Mrs. Ford the last hearing, I asked her to give me a feeling of what is going to be an advantage for the 6th grade being there. We all know about 14 years ago when this school was created, we put the 6th grade in and the townspeople, and I was on council then, so I went to a lot of these meetings with Mr. Addix and Bev Regan when they were talking about what was happening here. And I personally went to them. I think they were PTO meetings for information. And it was clearly said the best thing for 6th grade would be in a 4-5. The question I had for Mrs. Ford, give me what is an advantage to reverse that. I heard from your teachers who spoke at public participation giving me statistics, the reason why they should stay. And my question, and I'm sorry, here you go, is when I looked at the list, I didn't see anything in the list that was so important to switch the grade configuration. Is there any other information? Because every person who talked about at the hearings, and I went to the hearings before I was sitting here, And here, and since I've been sitting here, there was always someone who came and spoke that they were afraid of their child going to Schaghticoke as a 6th grade. How do I tell them that it's going to be okay? We sold that 14 years ago. I think the press even agreed to us on that. I know you weren't involved in it, but
I
it's...
was actually involved in it.
All
I
right,
have
then.
the advantage of having been here, and at that time, actually Mrs. Mandillo was working at the central office, and she was one of the people who worked on the transition, how to move, well, we didn't really move 6th grade here. What happened was the 4th and 5th graders, the 5th graders moved up to 6th grade. But when all of that discussion was taking place when Sarah Noble was being renovated, the intent was that 6th grade would come to Sarah Noble and be like an elementary school. That really never happened. Physically, what we did was we took the teachers, and we didn't take the students, they were here. We took the teachers, and really they operated and functioned the same way they did at Schaghticoke. So the intent of having them be 4-6 elementary and either having one primary teacher or 2 teachers just teaming, that never really happened. They physically were operating just like they did at Schaghticoke.
One of the advantages, and I did do subbing, and I can't sub anymore because I'm on the board, that the 6th grade did have recess, and it was one thing that was elementary. They were in teams, you're correct. The 5th grade had teams of 2 here when I subbed. We need to say something to those parents, and I asked Mrs. Ford, did she plan on having meetings? I believe Angie corrected me and said the PTO has tried and they don't get the parents out to inform these parents what's going to happen and how it's going to be a good case.
I think that's a great point. I just passed out the letter. Mrs. Ford wrote a letter because she wanted to respond to some of the things that came up at the last meeting.
All right, I'm not a speed reader, so I'm going to have to...
And I understand that. I meant to have that at your place. I think that is part of the planning, that if and when the board decides to close, should they decide to close, that's the planning that has to happen in the year before you close. That's when you need to start talking to the parents and bringing them up to Schaghticoke and actually talking about how the move and the transition will happen.
And I know that some of these things I've said it when I was standing at the podium and sitting in this chair, but this is my last chance because whatever we happen, I hope we decide tonight because I think the town needs to know where we're going. I particularly like larger groupings because when you have a K to 3, I prefer the K to 5. We tried to do that at one time at Squash Hollow Road, and the voters voted it down to have 3. It would have been 4 K to 5 buildings, and then we did this and moved them up here. I would have much faster. Because when kids are together, the longer period, the staff is able to do a better flow because they're physically with them. I'm not saying anything about a child moving from here to Schaghticoke or vice from Pettibone. The information doesn't follow. It's the gut feeling as a teacher, and since I taught for 40 years, that's when I know the children. I can anticipate. There are children in this school that the whole staff knows about. I like neighborhood schools. I'd rather have a smaller unit than a larger unit. I think one of the mistakes of this building, and I said that when I was on council, but I guess I wasn't voted in my favor then either, is that this is too large. I would much rather see a small K to 5 building where kids sit together longer so we can develop their skills before they move into the secondary kind of a program. We made that value judgment to build this. I think this is too big. I compliment Dr. T in the way he's handled this building, but I think it's overwhelming when you have this many kids in the same building. I don't see the communications among the teachers any greater than they were in separate schools because they're too large. I would like to see Pettibone stay open as long as we're able to, and I do like part of your motion that we reconsider where we put other things like the central office, and we could put that into that building. His motion stated that, to say a later date. And I'm commenting on the later date piece.
No, that talked about
disposition.
if we were to close, what would happen to Pettibone.
Then you can gavel me. All right, I'll stop. But I do believe that. And I'm going to stop there. I firmly believe that it is the wrong thing to do to close Pettibone School at this moment. And the other thing I want to show, where is I? Norm there. Norm, I thank you for the great articles in your paper to say what I'm doing. If you didn't catch all my points, you could review it tonight. They were excellent. Thank you, Art, for those. And I noticed there was a great picture of a bank. I think 1903 it was built. And we're trying to sell it. And that's a solid building.
It's not. It's C. It's a C. It's a poor condition.
Thank you, Mayor. The Mayor says it's a poor condition. Thank you very much. But we're still trying to sell it. So I see that Pettibone, who has been improved over the years because we did have a bond issue when the 3 elementaries, after the Squash Hollow went down, we added a gym to Northville. We added one at Hill and Plain because there was one at Pettibone. Everything had to be equal. We upgraded some things at Pettibone. It is not in the condition I think people are believing it is. I think it's a solid building. It's probably built better than the other schools because it was built at a different time. I will stop talking now.
Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. I yielded to you, huh?
Yes, that's your fault.
You were silly.
Well, here we are. And from my point of view, the vast majority of this time, we have been talking about one thing and one thing only, and that's money. Money. Statistics. We have not spoken about academics. We have not spoken about our children. I concur with Mr. Coppola. Neighborhood schools. John Pettibone is not just bricks and mortar. That's not what it is. That is a community school. This is the foundation of our whole academic learning. We fail in the younger grades, you can't play catch up. It's very expensive to play catch up. Tutoring, remedial, very, very time consuming, and I will concede on that fact too, expensive. We have an opportunity and we have an obligation to make this community reach its potential, and that includes our children. It also includes a constituency that we haven't even mentioned, our grandchildren. I'll get in trouble for saying that. But we do have to consider, do we want to saddle in 10 years, in 20 years, make it 30 years, the financial burden of building a school? Mr. Coppola already referenced a neighboring district, $50 million, they own the land. I don't believe that we've felt the impact of Route 7 being at 4 lanes now, and I believe we will. We have other concerns. Mr. Coppola brought up the 6th grade. I'm not satisfied with that. The Wellness Committee has already has concerns with Scotticoke as it is for exercise. And I'm here, I don't have any concrete idea of how the specials will be handled. How are we going to handle art? How are we going to handle music? A program that we have consistently seen accolades for. I'd like to continue that. We have a good thing going here, and we want to close it for a few bucks. We're not the Board of Finance. We're the Board of Education.
Excuse me. I will ask there will be no applauding or comments made. We all have a right to our opinion. Please let us speak.
And I will conclude. I'm confident with this board. I know all of you. You know me. I truly believe that when you think about the facts, when you think about the future, when you think about grandchildren, that reason will trump a folly. And I truly believe and hope we do that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Murphy.
Oh, thank you. I had wanted to go back and take the opportunity, if you don't mind, to address some comments that were with regard to all of a sudden. I know that the Board of Ed, in my experience for the last 11 years, has rarely done anything all of a sudden. And I don't mean that as a negative. But during that time, I know I can go back 8 years when I took all the floor plans for all of the schools and counted up all the empty classrooms and came up with 21 classrooms that weren't being used for anything. And I discounted art rooms, any kind of specials, anything going on, but rooms that were virtually empty or used for storage. And I didn't get too far because people didn't really want to think about that, vacant spaces and things like that. So fast forward a couple of years, and now the board thinks, well, okay, we should look into that. So it took them a while with the last board, and they hired consultants to meet with members of the community, boards and commissions, to come up with, are we using our assets to the best potential that we can, and what do we have? And what I find a little curious is that they were very careful to make sure they hired an outside entity with no bias to help them sort through all of the information. And I was not on that committee, so I can tell you with a clear conscience that reviewing the results and the recommendations was kind of interesting from the point of view that we've had two large demographic studies that have been right on with regard to population, considering scenarios of aging communities, the highway, the state of the economy for Connecticut, which hadn't even tanked yet. And I really think that it would be appropriate to, if I can, get some of the administration's reasons and the things that they considered when they made their recommendation at that committee level, which many of you weren't at the committee, as to why they made the recommendation and voted in favor of a school being reduced. And the reason I ask that is because from watching budgets year after year, and the fight over the budgets year after year, and I don't mean fight from an angry standpoint, I mean from the actual trying to make sure it gets through so that we can provide all the services for the community that we need to provide, not just the school side or the town side, but together. And it's a struggle because we have people out there that are struggling. So I think that that may have contributed to part of the reason why this body wanted to look in ways to help stretch the dollar. Now, it does cost a lot to maintain any facility. The town has the Richmond Center, which used to be a school, and I understand when that was closed it was quite emotional, and I know East Street School, that was very emotional. And these are emotional things, but they also are balanced with a lot of the concerns for the education quality and the cost. I would like to say that I think every level of government is responsible for how they spend the taxpayer dollars, not just because of the dollar, but to make sure that we get the quality that we expect from all of our officials when we are taxing people and spending their money and making decisions on their behalf. And that's as, you know, a community as a whole. And I'm sorry about my soapbox part. I feel kind of like we didn't really get to tell the public a lot of the reasons why some of the recommendations were made the way they were. And if the Board of Ed would consider it, maybe we could get Dr. Pattyfoot or Mrs. Baldelli to talk about some of the reasons why they made the recommendations they made sitting on the committee, or what put them over the edge to vote, yes, we should close a facility. Because I, too, would like to see more of my money going to a student and not so much of it maintaining an administration. I think that those teachers can take the concern they have in that building to another building. And I also will tell you that it is cheaper to add on classrooms, and we do have the acreage at Northville, Hill and Plain, and Scantico, than it is to build a whole new facility. Those schools are tucked in for modern times, out of the way, out of the mind of any other issues that might occur on a main thoroughfare. And I really think that this topic is important enough that you have taken it up for consideration, and I would hope that we could get a recommendation or an explanation from the superintendent.
I don't remember the recommendation saying that we had to close.
No.
The recommendation gave us
Scenario B.
options.
Well, the recommendation was scenario B.
Right, but it didn't say we had to close. They were a subcommittee to bring
That's
what
why
the
I wanted-
widgets were going to be. And I think I want to say those people who served, I know that Tom in particular felt very emotional about it, and I understand that. Their job was to see, is there a space? There is no question at the present time there is space. But it didn't say that we had to do it. They gave us options to the former board. They passed the buck to us, and I bought my armor for it. And so that's why I question that your statement that they recommended to close.
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I when we say there was a vote, I was at the last meeting. I don't recall a vote, and if there was a vote, I'd like to know what it was.
No,
I meant at their committee.
the school utilization committee brought forward a recommendation.
It is
Right.
only a recommendation.
So she was wondering if anyone who was on that committee would like to speak.
I know that Mr. Schaffer had his hand up first. I would defer to you, Mr. Schaffer. since
Well, I was
you're
just
on the
asking for a
committee.
point of clarification.
Yep.
Well, that's what I meant, on their committee, where they were speaking
School
with the
utilization
consultant.
committee.
And their
That
job
they
was
need-
space.
Not completely space. Actually, I
Good.
I apologize. I went back today and over the course of the months and tried to get my notes together, so bear with me, and brought forth the charge of the committee. The recommendation, it was a recommendation from the committee, and there were a variety of scenarios, but the consensus was, if I may, Mr. Schaffer, is that
You're
correct?
right, you're right.
I don't want to speak for you inappropriately, that the consensus was that the scenario B of closing of the school and redistricting was one that all felt that based on 8 months of work was something that we could come together. To give you a little bit of just a snippet of some of that committee, because I do think it's important. This has all been about a process. It's been about steps. And I had just penned some of my thoughts, and it's been a difficult process. On October 25th, 2012, the board sent out a letter to the members of the community who volunteered to serve on the school utilization committee. Myself and Mr. Schaffer are the only two current board members who served on that committee, so thank you, Mr. Schaffer. The rest of the committee was a complete mixture of educators, community members, town leaders, and parents. The charge of that committee, taken directly from the documents of that committee, was to determine the most efficient use of allocation of resources, of our resources, given the forecast of demographics, declining enrollment, and capacity of the existing schools. We are also to consider configurations, infrastructure, practices, procedures, and those implications, including but not limited to all our academic programs and our impacts on our families and our children. That was part of all of what we had discussed over that time. After months of data by Malone and McBroom, collaboration, conversation, concerns, the committee made a recommendation to the Board of Education in June of 2013. There's a tremendous amount of work. It's not easy. It's a very difficult task, and the recommendation was just as difficult as the work that was brought forward. It's now a year later from the recommendation, and the board has had several hearings in that time frame to review the data. So I have further comments I may save for the overall motion, but the actual process was a recommendation. We're not bound by that recommendation, but the recommendation came through a consensus of those individuals, I believe 26, who felt that was something that they would feel comfortable based on all of that criteria.
But your report only, Dale, because I was at the public hearings for those, only showed me the widgets. The report that was presented at the hearings did not mention anything. And I asked it twice standing at the podium because I was not sitting here.
I think it's
You
very-
never forward that information to us why it was educationally important.
I think that
Or if you said it, I missed it completely.
for me personally, I'll speak for myself. There were numerous conversations of some of the educational benefits of realigning and moving some things around, but it's inappropriate of me to voice my opinion based on 26 other committee members. Some don't have the same viewpoint. But I can tell you that over the 8 months that it was not solely about numbers or transportation or savings or building usage. That
But your report did not include that.
I think any report is impossible to include every sidebar in conversation.
But each time I stood at that podium, I said, please tell me what the educational rationale, and no one from that committee reported to me as a public participation person, and I asked that repeatedly sitting in this chair, so I have not really felt that discussion that you had that made it important that we do this.
Mr. Schaffer.
I have a couple of points I'd like to make while I can get in among my colleagues.
We'll give you a moment.
Okay. First of all, I live in Gaylordsville, and the first plan of redistricting that this what do they call it? Yes, that they put out just basically took the top chunk of New Milford, and they said they would all go to Northville and I squawked because there's a river going through and no way to get across it. And then they went back and did that, but I'm not sure how many other things like this snuck through about the redistricting that I didn't catch, but I did catch the river. Transportation for the young kids from Gaylordsville, and I have talked to many, many, many of my neighbors. There was a breakfast at the fire department. I went down and talked to people there, and they are very, very concerned about the length of time kids will be on the buses to get from Gaylordsville down to Hill and Plain. This morning, I decided, okay, my car had to be inspected. Okay, so I left home at 8:30, and it took me 35 minutes just to get down to Big Y. And therefore, to get down to Hill and Plain, I don't know how long it would have been taken. But it's a long ride for young kids. Now, my second point that I really would like to make is I think we should be happy that the parents of the younger kids in New Milford are happy with us and the way things are. There are very few towns where the parents really endorse what is going on with their kids and in their schools. I was surfing television last night and heard a speech that was given by Tom Foley to the AFL-CIO in Connecticut, and one of the points he made was that parents know what is best for their kids. And I think from the parents that we have heard here, they think the best thing for their kids would be to leave Pettibone open. Also, I don't believe in any of our meetings, and I may be off by one or two, I don't think we've heard any support for closing Pettibone from any teacher. I may be wrong, and to me that we have parents that like the things the way they are. They like the kids have got some space to move around, that if a counselor needs to bring a kid to a special room, there's plenty of special rooms to bring them to talk. And I just think it would be a mistake to close that school.
Before, I feel like we kind of got off track for what the mayor said. Was there anyone who did want to speak to answer the mayor's question regarding why they supported scenario B?
Well, my recollection is, as Mrs. Hollenbeck stated, that we didn't take a vote. We looked at 5 scenarios, and we looked at several scenarios, and then determined that that was really the most optimal given the population decline, and knowing that we would have, it would be tight one year perhaps at Schaghticoke, but a lot of room would, space would open up. So we looked at discrete scenarios. We didn't look at every scenario. We didn't talk about new construction or anything like that. We just looked at available space, basically K-8, and made a determination. And, you were on the committee. Did you want to add anything?
Just that the charge of the group was about efficiency. It wasn't
Right.
that we started with a blank page and designed a school district with optimal grades. We didn't look at kind of,
Right.
K-8 configurations. We looked at the way the town was structured, and the information provided was about efficient use of space. So although we did have conversations about, instruction, this wasn't a problem necessarily about how to fix an instructional situation that Scotticoke only had 2 grades, or it wasn't about if K3 configuration was an optimal configuration. It started with what's the most efficient use of our buildings, and that was the question that we discussed. So although other factors were in there, they weren't necessarily at least my understanding is the mission of that committee.
So I just want to follow up because it's her question.
Okay.
Then you did not spend a lot of time, because Wendy gave me the impression a moment ago that you considered the educational. You were considering the efficiency, the widgets, where it was most efficient for building use, not for the educational purpose.
We did look at the educational impact of
because you're assistant superintendent, you know a lot.
I appreciate that. But we didn't. The mission of the committee wasn't to sit down with a blank sheet of paper and say, if you had to build a school system from the ground up, how would you set your grade configurations? Would you have kindergarten schools only? Would you have K2 schools or K3 schools or K8 schools or 7-12 schools? Those conversations weren't part of. We started with what's the most efficient use of the building, and then within the most efficient use, are there educational models and structures that can be successful, and what are the impacts to instruction if we change those? So we did have a lot of talk about instruction, but it was predicated on efficiency of space.
Efficiency. I guess I better sell my house. I have 2 empty rooms right now with my kids away at school. Sorry. Again, I'd like to. I do have concerns with transportation. It was very clear that our transportation costs would go up to the tune of $250,000. I don't think we should lose that in the mix here. As Mr. Schaffer said, Gaylordsville and children of any age for that matter, spending an hour in a bus to get to school and an hour to get home, throw in inclement weather for kicks and giggles, that's unacceptable. Legal, but unacceptable. And I think these are the types of things that the parents have shared their concerns with. Do our children reach their potential with these parameters? I say no. They don't. The other concern I have with buses is quite frankly, bullying. There's one adult on board, and they're driving the bus with 30, 40 children on, and I'm hearing that bullying will not be a problem. I've been in education for 32 years. Bullying has been a problem for all of those 32 years. Bullying is a very covert thing. It's very sneaky. That's what children do. We know that. And now we're giving them an opportunity to increase that potential? I don't believe that's a good idea. Children don't report. You see your kid. Is everything okay? Yes. Is everything okay at school? Yes. And you know it's not. And we're setting up that scenario? Again, I didn't see that in the report. I just saw buses. I didn't see the human factor on those buses. And that's what we need to be concerned with.
Mr. Littlefield?
I just want to elaborate on a couple things that I think aren't 100% clear, and these are things that I've heard around town and people have brought up. And I want to make sure everybody realizes that by closing Pettibone, it doesn't mean that we're losing any teachers. There's no plan to eliminate those teachers. They're just going to move to a different building. That's the only difference. And my thoughts about efficiency, it's not just about efficiency, but my idea is the resources that it would allow. We live in a town that barely passes. Number one, we live in a town where people barely show up to vote. And the ones that do, we barely pass an education budget. And often it doesn't pass. So I would rather take those resources. It's not about efficiency for me. It's about taking those resources and putting them where they belong. Because I'd like to see some other programs here, particularly people know my thing is, I'd like to see some things for the talented and gifted kids. But we don't have the money for that. It's never in the budget for that. And I don't foresee that happening. So I'm kind of hoping that, some of those things can happen here. As far as your idea with the recess, I'm all for recess. I think kids should have recess probably at least through 8th grade. I think that's a big part of the problem why kids can't sit still in school. They need a break during the day to get out there and run it off a little bit. And I think they'd be able to sit still in class a little bit better. But I just want to make clear, it's we're not closing the school and firing everybody in the school. That's not what's happening here. Those teachers are moving to another building. So.
Yes.
Point of clarification.
Okay.
My understanding that there would be some job loss. Pardon me?
Excuse me. Can you please keep your conversations
if I could,
not even have one? If you need to have a conversation, please leave the room. I'm trying to listen to other board members, and all I'm hearing is your private conversations, and it's very disrespectful.
if I could have a clarification
Yes.
Of job loss.
Okay. Who can answer that?
We did have a poster up there, and we did talk about potential positions that would be eliminated. We did talk. We put an administrator. We didn't specify if it was a principal or an assistant principal. We took a blended rate. We did put down nursing. We did put down, I believe, LMC and a few classroom teachers. It depends, because if you have, for example, this year, we ended up with some children in kindergarten, a few extra children in kindergarten in Hill and Plain, but we had already started at John Pettibone. And rather than taking those 14 children who already bonded with that teacher and spreading them out over the remaining teachers at Pettibone and moving that teacher to Hill and Plain, we ended up opening a new section. Had all those children been in one place, that would have just been one classroom.
So I can conclude that there will be job loss, and it sounds like at least 10.
I don't think it was that high.
No.
There were positions.
In those positions, would any of those be music, art, anything of that nature?
Well, realistically, we took away, we reduced an art position this year because of enrollment K6, K3 really, K3. I mean, we did eliminate positions this year based on enrollment.
Mm-hmm. So we have been doing that all along without closing a school.
That's correct.
Thank you. Just
Cool.
I want everyone to know that I've spoke to everybody on this board except Mr. Schaefer. I felt the tension in discussing of what's the right thing to do. No one here wants to make the wrong decision. But there was tension in our conversation of going, what are we going to do? How do we feel? There's emotion involved because, again, no one wants to make a mistake. But I had said earlier at a meeting, and I don't remember what meeting it was, that there's a human side to Pettibone School. I have seen it personally myself with an 8-year-old daughter there. And I had a professor in college. I have a master's in education. And the professor's name was Ed Murray. I'm sure he's long gone. I've been out of school a long time. And he said to me, John, if you go into teaching, remember one thing. If you lose a child by 5th grade, you have lost them for the remainder of the school life. It's very, very important that you get the skills with that child in the beginning educational years. And I believe that is happening at Pettibone. I'm not sure of the other schools because I don't visit them. I know that there is a love when you walk in that building. I have seen it. I've been there for assemblies. And I'll just leave you with one story. I mean, I've got many I could tell you on. And trust me, no one studied the numbers more than I have. I'm retired, and I look at numbers. and I believe the numbers don't lie. But there is the human side. But I want to tell you a story, and I had a family relative die this past weekend. I had to go out of town. I didn't know if I'd be back tonight or not. I took our 8-year-old daughter with us because she knew the family members. I said, I don't think we're coming home for your last day of school. She was upset. But things had worked out where we came home a day early because I was afraid that with perception, if I don't show up, people are thinking, well, maybe I don't want to vote. Maybe I'm not sure what I want to do. So we get in the car. We're on our way home. We're passing Pettibone School at about 12:30 in the afternoon, and my daughter says to me, please drop me off at school. I want to go to school. And I said, why? She says, I really love going to school. Now, if you can get a child who loves to go to school and loves to learn, we've done our job. And the only relationship I have, and I mean by relationship, a professional relationship with Paula, is that we've had many discussions. She runs a heck of a school there, and at this time, I will not support closing Pettibone.
Okay. I would just like to add to your comment. I don't have any children in Pettibone, so I don't know how Pettibone works. I have a daughter in Northville. She's been there 3 years. I feel that same. I'm not discounting what you're saying. I do feel that same feeling in Northville. My daughter loves to go to school. My son is now at Northville, but he spent a year at Hill and Plain in Excel. And going into the Excel program, I still felt the same. And I would hope that in all of our schools, we would have that nurturing, loving feeling, that the kids have. So I'm not arguing with your point. I just want to say that I have seen that firsthand at the other 2 elementary schools too. I believe the mayor wanted to speak, and then
I did want to follow up on a comment Dave had about losing positions. Every year, how many positions do you think or people leave because of attrition? Either they're retiring, they're moving to another place, they're on sabbatical, they didn't hit tenure, and they...
I guess I can try to address that. And some years we have, in the 20s. Other years we have 10 or 11, so probably on an average
8, 10, 12, something like that. But as I said, that's, based on different reasons, personal reasons, moving, retirement, things like that. So some years much greater, other years 4 or 5. But if you average it out, you probably guess it's, in between half a dozen and a dozen.
Because when I read the pension report, I usually say, thank you.
Mr. Coppola.
I have a comment that I wasn't planning on. John, that's why I'm fighting to keep Pettibone open. I taught at Northville. I was fortunate to be there. I pretty much followed Tom Maddox around the district, and I taught at Hill and Plain. And you're absolutely right. It's the staff and the love of the kids that you, especially in the elementary. I'm sorry, David and David. The elementary, you feel that strong relationship with kids. I'm working with a child here, and when I walk down the hall, and it was a pleasure the last 2 years, everyone knows him. And just people come by and say hello to him. And actually, I appreciate Dr. T and Mrs. Bull for praising me for working with this child. It was a pleasure for me, but I could sense it, that everyone understood and was rooting for this child. And the more grades you have, the better. So I agree. But the reason I put my hand up before had nothing to do with that, believe it or not. It was a comment that Pat made to me that made me aware. I thank every single person who worked on that committee. It was listening to Tom about his feeling, because I know Tom had a very strong relationship to Pettibone. I appreciate Beth, because I know Beth is a person who has a great deal with statistics. Thank you, my buddy Walter on town council, for joining him. We have the same empathy because we taught history, that great subject that is not in STEM. And all the other people who worked on that. You did your job well. And I want to make sure people realize that I understand you did your job well for what was the utilization. I just have the emotional part. Maybe that makes me the historian and not the mathematician. That a school is a family, and I don't care what. And I come to this school, and I think it's great. Thank you, Dr. T. Thank you, Mrs. Bull. But it's hard. You got 30 classes of 4th grade, 30 classes of 5th. I might have my numbers somewhat wrong. It's harder to get that feeling. And I know you two try very hard. I appreciate when I walk down the hall, you're looking at stuff kids have done. But when you're in a smaller unit, the greater that feeling is. But I personally want to thank everyone who worked on that committee. You did your job well because you looked at space. That was the utilization, and that was your charge. Some of those things may have come up, Wendy. I wasn't privy of it. And Mayor, I would have loved to have been on that committee, but they didn't invite me.
Me either.
Yes.
Allison, thank you, Mr. Coppola. That means a lot to me because it really was a very difficult charge.
Right, and it's not against your committee.
No.
All right, I just want that
and
clear.
for me, I am looking at numbers. Doesn't mean I'm all about the money. I've been on this board 13 years. I've fought a lot of budget situations and been out a lot of nights to advocate for the school system. And it's a privilege. When I look at what we have, what the committee went through, and I see that our schools in 2015 will have 70%, 64%, 57.1%, 82%, and 54% utilization. It's not all about the numbers with me. It's about taking those resources and infusing them back into our system and being able to try and either hold on to programs, create programs, hold on to staff, create staff. And I personally feel that all of our schools, we should have parents in the community coming out and saying how great they are. We want to hold on to you because the feeling should be there at every school. But I simply can't support having empty classrooms and having those funds go by the wayside. I think that it is, for me, to invest into our programs instead of the walls of a building is much more important. And so that's where I'm going. And that was why I came to the conclusion on the committee that I did, hearing some of the conversations and looking at some of the numbers and taking it all in. And for the last 18 months, really going through the process.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Olson.
Well, I think it's been stated before that to alleviate some of the space and still have some real estate at the town's disposal, I noticed the committee didn't comment too heavily, or I missed it, on the E Street building, whereby we could easily move the district offices into, well, a variety of schools, but in this particular case, into John Pettibone. We can keep this school open. And I've said it before, it's an insurance policy right now. What if, and we can't answer that, but, history can. History can. John, I believe, referred to 1973 in New Milford. Population of New Milford, 1973. About 10,000. 10,000. They're talking about putting a rotary in when we took one out on Route 7. My point being, historically we have grown. We're around 28,000?
Yes.
28,000.
7,147.
Write that down.
But you're talking 180%, correct? About 180% population growth. I mean, I've been around numbers for 30 years. And I have to put down your kid's an 80. Your kid's not an 80%. No student is 80%. Your student, I find very cooperative in class, has helped me, give examples of what they do. That's what we do. That's what all our schools do. That's what all our schools should continue to do. And we should give them the resources to do that. And that is the glory of a neighborhood school. And I concur with Mr. Spatola. You're absolutely, I'm agreeing, you are absolutely correct. The first years in education are so critical, just as they are at home. Look at the development you have from birth to 5 years, from birth to 6. They learn to speak. They learn to walk. They learn an alphabet. This is massive learning that they have the skills for life. And again, we should maximize that potential. And they're kind of obvious. I will not support closing the school with other options on the table.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Walensky.
We were handed out some floor plans of what the schools would look like if we closed John Pettibone School. And looking through those papers, Helen Plain was the only school that I saw that did not have a number for additional rooms that were going to be vacant. I believe there was like seven empty classrooms in one building and 4 in another. Is Helen Plain going to be packed with this redistricting and the closing of JPS school? And is the nurse's office back in the old nurse's office, or is she still in a classroom in this new?
In the scenario that you were given,
Correct.
The nurse is in the space she's currently in now, which was the original nurse's office when that, for all the years prior to when they moved that office.
Okay.
The schematic that you had Head Start in there. I think it also had an activity room, and it had a few special ed people that were in full-size classrooms. So there are probably 3 classrooms in there that if we needed that space, we could use that space.
So you'd be taking 3 classrooms away from special ed?
Well, or we would be. What we have to understand is that some special ed people have moved into full classrooms, and their caseload might be 5 students or 7 students at a time. They don't really need a full classroom, but because we have the space, they have a full classroom. There's also an activity room there and the Head Start room.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lawson.
Presently in the legislature, preliminary discussions are for universal preschool. And I think that's, again, something, whether we agree with it or not, may be mandated on us. We know we get mandates. They will continue. This may be a mandate, and I would say within 10 years, certainly within 20. Where are we going to put them? We have approximately 15 or so kindergartens. There's your 15 rooms right there. And if we have a school that's closed, again, I think we've had a lot of discussions, and I think that I don't see the rush, quite frankly. I don't get it.
There's no perfect solution, unfortunately. There's no one-size-fits-all. And I'll have to, reiterate what Mrs. Fallenbeck said. This has been a very, very, very difficult decision. I'm in the schools all the time. I'm very active in PTO. I spent yesterday at Scattacoke, taking care of things there. And I talked to parents. I talked to students. And when I ran for the Board of Ed, I ran for the board to do what was best for all the students of New Milford and also people as taxpayers. Not only you, but the people who aren't represented here today. And the thing that just keeps coming back to me is that closing JPS allows us to use that capital money to improve the education for your students. I would love to see foreign language K through 5. I would love to see, shop back at Scattacoke and home ec increased. There's so many things we could do with that money besides sit over there and have it heat an empty building. So, to be honest with you, when I walked in this room tonight, I still wasn't sure how I was going to vote. but I am going to support this motion to close it.
Yes, Mr. Lawson.
I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion. The amendment to review this matter again in 1 year from now. If I could have a second. And
I will second it for the purpose of discussion.
And if I may. Yeah. I don't see a consensus here. And I agree with you. We do represent everybody. And as I've argued, some that aren't even born yet. And I think that would be a prudent thing. I think everybody would be happy with that. We'll have more figures at that time. Who knows? We may get building permits, home permits. We may have businesses move in. We have a lot of opportunity here. And without haste, I would move that we revisit this. It's not just important. I'd have to call it a historic issue in 1 year from now.
Well, I just want to say that I was in Richfield when they closed Branchfield, the newest school. I was fortunate because I was new on staff, so everyone went out of their way to greet their colleagues in the other schools because it could have been their school. And while I was there, they closed, Bowell Mountain, and then they closed Branchfield, kind of like a Northfield section of them. And before I left Richfield and went on to create a gifted and talented program somewhere else, they opened both of them. And they're facing the same way. And right at the moment, they're putting a hold on it because they're not sure what's going to happen. They don't want to go through what they did before. They did make a mistake, and they took Branchfield and made it mothball and cost them a great deal of money to reopen that because they had to go to the current standards by the state. Branchfield was turned into a Y. They had to close that down. I understand Brookfield is looking at the same scenario at the present time in their school systems of thinking that maybe they're putting a hold on it right now because they want to see what's going to happen. October, the superintendent will be coming back to us and telling us what actually happened in the schools and what kind of impact was at Hill and Plain and impact in other schools. I'm convinced with Mr. Cummings' articles about what's happening in Danbury that we're going to feel the effect of that. So since we really don't feel comfortable as a whole one way or the other, I'm agreeing to the motion, and a lot of it is due to my experience in Richfield. And they went through this, closed it, and they realized they made a mistake.
Ms. Point of clarification on the motion that you're looking to amend. The motion's been made to amend and seconded that you're looking for a year from approximately now to come back and revisit the issue, which would really mean 2 years of possibly closing a school because you want to give the public approximately a year's notice to at least. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, my motion was to revisit it in 1 year. The
1 year
interpretation
from now.
is up to you.
Okay. And I'll interpret it. I will. Thank you.
Any more discussion on the amended motion? Am I doing that right? On the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment motion coming back in a year from now to discuss this? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. The motion has failed. So we're back to the original motion. The original motion is still on the table. I just got to write that down. Give me a second. Well, I just wanted to say, since I think I'm the only one who hasn't spoke so far on the board. I do have the gavel, but I figured I might speak a little bit. As a few of the other people have said, it's been a very tough process for me. A lot of people out there know me. Know I don't make decisions lightly. I don't want to be bullied into decisions. I don't want people to, try to make me change my mind, which has not happened. I've been able to speak with a lot of the board members openly about my decisions or about my thoughts. As a teacher in a K-8 school, K-8 school is great. It's a great school. Love Little Sherman. It's great because I know a lot of the kids. I know kids from 3rd grade, and I teach 7th and 8th. The only issue I guess I have is I don't see an issue with moving 3rd grade to Sarah Noble educationally. I don't see an issue with moving 6th grade to Schaghticoke. In our school, we segregate to some extent, our hallways. We have K1, 2 in one section of the building, 3, 4, 5 in another section. 6 is kind of in the little alcove, and then we have 7 and 8. So I don't see a negative educational impact by moving the students. You're taking the people, obviously, with a few less employees, teachers, administrators. But you're just moving them to another building. You're moving your house. Go from. I moved a few years ago. I went from one house to the other. My kids are fine. I'm still there. We're all still together. I don't see it to be an issue educationally as a teacher. And I've taught from 4th to 8th, so I think I'm pretty knowledgeable. I've taught 15 years, not 40.
You'll get there.
But 15. But on a note that Mrs. Fallenbach had mentioned, I would like to see us be able to put money towards new programs, enrich the programs that we have. I feel we're lacking in some areas. I really do. My main goal getting on the board was coming as a parent, a teacher, and a taxpayer. Taxpayer was more at the end. I mean, I'm always going to pay taxes. I can't go somewhere and not pay taxes. But I'm really here for the kids. That was my main goal, to see what I can do for our children, all of our children, to give them the best education they can get. And I'm actually the same with Ms. Chastain. I walked in, and I didn't have a decision made. I was leaning in one direction, very much so, but I really wasn't sure. I just, this is a big decision, and I honestly would not like to make it. I would like to just say, somebody else do it. You decide. But for the reasons I stated, that I don't think instruction will be negatively impacted, and I'd like to take those monies and invest in our program, I will be supporting the motion. Yes, Mr. Coppola.
I've taught all those grades.
Good.
My favorite years were 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, in the same situation because they were zany, and I felt that most of the time I was zany. The thing is, I agree with you. I'd like to see the money, but being on town council, the 6 years I was there, and the years I've been here in the Board of Ed, and I had the pleasure of working with Wendy as a Republican, so we could talk. Sometimes I don't see that money that I was hoping that would stay into education, stay with it. They found the money, town council when I was on it, saying, oh wow, we have a savings here, we will pull it back. Every year that I was on town council, whatever the recommendation was from this body was reduced at the recommendation of town council.
Correct.
And so I see them saying we can reduce it more now, because now I know that some of the town council people said if we sold the building, they would put it into a special fund. But this is not the savings of the administration that we talked about. I think I agree with Dave. There will be savings there, savings in the building. Sorry, Mayor. I don't trust them that the money will go to us, because it'll give an excuse to reduce our budget more. They reduced it at $650,000. I thank the mayor for working out the insurance, so the impact wasn't as great. She probably had foresight on that, and I didn't. I will accept that. But every year that I was on town council under a Republican and Democrat, each year there was a recommendation at least $500,000 to reduce whatever was proposed by the education. I remember Wendy. Wendy, I felt sorry for you going before town council, because you knew that you didn't have a chance, and tried to explain why our proposed budget was at what we should. I'm afraid when we get the savings, it's not going to go back to the gifted and talent, which I feel very strongly, because I'm not teaching the gifted and talent because the money wiped out in this district. And it was a wise decision of one board member to say we'll have one placeholder, the hope that we are able to add in the future, because once you wipe out that one placeholder, you'll never get it. I believe she's been with us 19 years as a placeholder, so I don't have much faith. And she's excellent.
Not my daughter.
And but that was the purpose of keeping the placeholders so that we could add on, because it's harder to create a program. So I understand what you both are saying. I wish you were right. And I hope during my time, if the school is closed, that I actually see it given to programs when we say gifted and talented and others that we really believe in, and not watch it be reduced when it goes to the board, to the public. I'm sorry, I have little faith.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Jones?
Decline.
Would anyone else like to discuss the current motion on the table? Okay, do I need to reread the motion, or are we all set?
Well, maybe it might be easier so the public and us who know what we're voting on.
You have it.
Yes, I have. On the
Thank
deeper
you.
motion. Mr. Littlefield moved to close John Pettibone School at the conclusion of the 2014-15 school year, effective June 30th, 2015, and to redistrict based on scenario B of the school facility and utilization plan, and furthermore to assign appropriate subcommittees to review and recommend the disposition of the John Pettibone School property at a future date to be determined.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? And the motion has passed. Excuse me. Moving on to the executive session. I need a motion to enter into executive session to discuss pending CHRO claims involving claims of discrimination and/or harassment, and to review a written opinion from the board's legal counsel regarding the board's bus transportation agreement, and to invite into the session Attorney Michael McKeon, board counsel, and Mr. Coppola. I need to, we're making a motion to go to exec.
I'm here.
But you need to vote.
I don't have, you have enough to vote.
Okay. Okay. And to invite the session, and Dr. Gina and Patty Foote, Superintendent of Schools.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Wait, who did it?
I don't know who did it.
Who made the motion?
I'll defer to John.
John, David, all those in favor of the motion? Okay. Opposed? Abstained? So what do I?
He didn't vote. He left. He said he left at 8:20.
Right.
Okay.
I put that he left at 8:20.
Okay, we will now be moving to executive session.
Close.
All right, so we're back from executive session. I hereby move that the board authorize the superintendent of schools, the board's legal counsel, and any other district personnel the superintendent deems appropriate to discuss with the board's transportation provider in accordance with board policies 3300C and 3541.23 possible terms and conditions regarding either a revised or a new transportation contract, with the understanding that any such revised or new contract will not be deemed final or binding until the board has approved it by a formal vote.
So moved.
Second.
Who's the second?
So-
It's a bipartisan vote at the end.
Any discussion regarding that? All those in favor of the motion? Okay, the motion has passed. I will need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Wendy, Mr. Littlefield, all those in favor? Okay, the motion, or the meeting has adjourned, and it's 9:12.